Okay. Good morning, my web friends and all of us here. Thanks again for waking up and coming to my, I think, first ever community session. Right. So this is not about Control App. This is purely about
no marketing.
No marketing whatsoever.
You never does marketing anyway.
Yeah. The only marketing is the Control App logo up there, but that's about it. I think you'll find this interesting. It's I'm going to kind of describe how the Windows Logon process works. So it's a deep dive, but it's not a crazy, super deep dive. So no APIs or stuff, but simple things any one of you guys can do to figure out why the Logon process is slow, how to troubleshoot it, and kind of get a higher level overview of what's going on there. Okay, so Eugene obviously helped me with the presentation. He's here. Thanks, Eugene. This has nothing to do with the Windows Logon process. Just put it here because of Shane. He's not here, so never mind. Okay, so quick agenda. We'll describe the Logon process overview. Okay, the main phases. Then I'll show you basically, that's the main part of the presentation, how to measure or how to find each phase and how to kind of calculate how long it took. Okay, it will be an interesting one, I think. During the presentation, we'll see the tools I'm using to figure out how the Windows Logon process behaves. Now, the important thing here is that just by using the Windows event log, you can pretty much get away with everything. Okay, so like 90% of what we show, just using the event log without turning on anything special is useful enough to figure out what's going on. Okay. We'll also, assuming we'll have some time, we'll see some other tools that might help, like event tracing for Windows, PowerShell scripts. This I think you'll find interesting because even though the event log is very simple and very approachable, it's a bit, you will see in a sec, it's a bit annoying to jump between the different logs. So what we did actually, and that's obviously also related to Control App, we prepared 2 PowerShell scripts that make things much easier. Now you can run them without anything special. You can just log on to Windows, run the PowerShell scripts, and they will show everything. Okay, so we'll get there towards the end. And if we let them, we'll also show a few slow logons and explain how, using the info we have seen here, how to troubleshoot them. Okay, so this is the overview of the Logon process. Now, one important note here that everything I'm showing, it's relevant to any Windows workload, right? Windows 7, 8, RES 2012, LDS 2008-02, so it's completely agnostic. It's not related to Citrix or VMware. It's just plain basic Windows stuff. Okay, now the phases I'm showing here, these are the mandatory phases, right? So if you just install plain vanilla Windows 7 and you log on, this stuff will happen in the background. Okay, so that's a few facts about what I'm showing here. So just a quick overview, and then we'll dive into each one of the phases and see how it affects the Logon process, how we can actually measure it. Okay, so obviously when Windows starts, it creates a session. Okay, the session is the suggestion phase. We'll see it in a sec. The next thing that will happen is Windows will present you with a Logon UI. Okay, and then obviously that's where the authentication phase takes place, usually against the domain controllers if it's not a workgroup environment. Next, the Windows user profile will be loaded. It has to be now. By the way, all of these phases are sequential. Right, so nothing can happen without the previous phase finishes. Okay, that's important. So user profile, group policy processing, user init, that's where WinLogon calls user init, which eventually turns out the shell. Okay, and the shell obviously, unless it's a published app, would be the Windows Desktop Explorer EXE. Okay, so that's the mandatory phases. We'll kind of focus on them. Now, just before we move on to the next slide, the reason I did this presentation in the first place was, for a long time I was a consultant, Zen Apps and Desktop, RDS, and one of the things that I was really concentrating on was trying to lower the Logon duration phase. I know it's really frustrating for end users to wait, and I found that even if you're doing a great project and everything is automated and everything looks great and PVS runs in cache or whatever, if the Logon is higher than 30 seconds, people might hate up the project. Okay, so I was like totally concentrating on lowering the Logon duration. It was like the holy grail for me. And when I started working with Control App, it gave me an excellent opportunity to research the entire thing much deeper. Obviously to integrate some features into Control App, but also as a As a geek, it was great fun for me, right? So that's how most of the information here was gathered. Okay, so before the actual mandatory phases, there are a few optional phases that might occur. As Helge might tell you if he was here, the Logon process is very complicated, especially if you bring in Citrix or VMware into the act. Okay, so here are some examples which might be familiar, and remember them because when I'll show the PowerShell scripts in the end, we will also cover some of them. Okay, so obviously network providers. This is optional, by the way, because if you're running Windows 7 or 8, this will happen probably during the boot phase. So when someone logs on, this is already done. But for RDS, whenever someone logs on to RDS, 2008 or 2012, then before or after the authentication phase, before the authentication phase, the network provider will be loaded. Okay, so that's something that you might see. Third-party profile solutions, that's becoming more and more popular, obviously. Citrix, I think, like 90% are using UPM, and the rest probably RES and Absence, maybe more, I don't know. So you will see this probably in almost any project, and I will relate to that later. GP scripts, this is an interesting story. They are becoming less and less popular now with all the automation features and obviously with the GPP, right? Group policy preferences, which are replacing most of these. And the important thing to notice here is that GP scripts, even if they are crap, they will only affect the login duration if they are synchronously executed, which is, by the way, not the default in Windows. Okay, so only if you configure explicitly synchronic group policy scripts execution, they will delay the login process. And lastly, the Citrix stuff. Okay, so fortunately enough, in the last years, what we've seen is that the Citrix phase of the login process, which happens quite late, it actually happens as part of the user init phase. We'll touch it soon. So it seems it's gotten much better. Now, especially with the printer mapping phase, which might take a very long time, happens asynchronously by default. Right? So if you log on, and even if you have a bunch of local printers on your Windows endpoint or thin client, the login process will not wait for it to complete before initializing the shell of the published app. Okay, but again, in some instances it might happen. Yes.
So you're saying that the group policies are not run synchronously by default, but you're suggesting that we configure them to run synchronously?
Yeah, so out of the box, since I think Windows Vista, Microsoft changed the default group policy scripts execution mode to asynchronically, which means that when the main group policy engine finishes executing, it will start running the scripts, but alongside that, user init will start doing its work. Okay, now sometimes you have a script which you really want to make sure it's running before the shell of the app is loaded. Let's say the app is relying on drive mapping, and you want to make sure drive mappings occur before the app is started. Then in this case, you might want to turn on group policy synchronic scripts execution.
And that's going to delay the app.
Yeah, and again, I'm really advise against that. Use GPP, use RES, use Absence. Try to avoid scripts because of so many reasons. Okay. So moving on, the first phase, session initialization.
Sorry, but this is just for the scripts, right? The policies are processed synchronously.
Yeah, the process. So group policy. Just say again, the group policy engine, or at least parts of it, I will touch it in a minute, has to be run synchronously. Okay, at least some of the phases, the main phases, and this will always happen after the user profile and before user init.
Right.
Okay.
Even UEM tools do have the same problem with a small amount of Windows pieces where they want to hook in on the right time. They have to start before the UEM process starts.
Yeah, that's right.
Only a couple.
Sure. Okay, so the first phase, right, this is everything relevant to any Windows workload whatsoever. So initially when someone initiates a session, and this could be either but just booting Windows, or if we're speaking about remote computing, which is usually what interests are, this would happen when someone initiates a connection to an RDS or VDI workload, VMware or Citrix, right? So I'm initiating the connection, the broker or some other management mechanism is telling the terminal services or brokering infrastructure on the endpoint to start a session. What will happen next is that the main SMSS system mechanism, which is in charge of initiating sessions, will actually execute a new SMSS process inside the new session. So this will be the first process inside a new session on Windows, right? Session ID 1, 2, whatever. This would be the first process. it will start up, and the only thing it will basically do is launch CSRSS. Okay, and then which is the client server runtime process in charge of various things in Windows. Then we have WinLogon, right, which is in charge of the main security aspects of the session. And then the next phase would be WinLogon will start Logon UI, which is essentially the UI that will show you the credentials screen, right? Will be in charge of actually authenticating the session. Okay, so we consider this phase is completed basically when Logon UI starts and the user can actually authenticate. Okay, this, from what we have seen, this is usually very fast, like a second or two, unless you have some really weird issue. But I would say it's really not common to see issues in this phase. Okay, this shouldn't take more than 2-3 seconds tops, and that's it. Now, what you're seeing here, this is process tree. This is a screen from process monitor. Okay, you all know, I guess, Procmon? Yeah? Raise your hands, who knows Procmon? Okay, except from the Citrix community guys, everyone. Right. So Procmon, it's a great utility. I really like it. You know, it's probably one of the best troubleshooting utilities out there. The thing is that it really has a lot of, it generates a lot of loads on the monitored system, especially if it's an RDS environment and you have lots of processes going on. Then, so one way to figure out what the session initialization phase looks like is obviously run Procmon, Logon, and then go to process tree and look at this. This also includes timestamp. I'm just not showing you here. But again, this might be this might create issues by its own. Because again, Procmon is very heavy on the system. It might even crash the system. So another way of checking out what's going on, and this is by far my favorite method, is to simply enable process auditing. Anyone ever tried enabling process auditing in Windows? 1, 2, 3, that's good. 4. So it's very simple, and it's probably one of the best kept secrets in Windows. Just go to gbedit or use group policy and go to the auditing part and enable process tracking. That's it, a single checkbox, a single GPO. It does not cause an overhead. Okay, so no problems whatsoever, even on very intense RDS servers. What it does do, it goes and writes into the security log every process start and termination event, which is really great info, especially if you're looking into Logon processes.
But what exact point does it start from?
Once this is enabled, when Windows boots, it starts really early. When the event log service is up, it starts logging processes. So very early during the Windows lifecycle phase, again, no overhead, great info. The only thing that if you decide to do that, and I would recommend anyone, especially in the RDS and VDI space, make sure the security log size is higher than the default. If you want to keep at least 24 hours, make it like 100 megs, right? 200 megs. Don't be cheap, right? It's important. Okay, so once this is enabled, you can see here, for example, I just logged onto the system, and you can see the SMSS. This is the first session. This is the first process running in the new session. Okay, so I can see the timestamp, and if this was a live demo, I can just hit on the up arrow, and you would see CSRSS and WinLogon. Okay, so again, the main point to take from here, if you want to troubleshoot session initialization phase, just enable process tracking, reproduce the issue, and go here to see the process timestamps. Okay, makes sense? Great. Now we will use this example in some other PowerShell stuff, so remember process tracking. The second phase, okay, so the session is initialized. The user can now see the log on screen, or obviously if you're using web interface or something, it's happening automatically. But what actually happens is that Logon UI again presents the option to authenticate, and this is what happens in the background. Okay, this is a bit complex. I'm obviously not going to delve into the authentication process. It by itself to be like a full presentation, but just quickly what's going on. WinLogon essentially is using LSA, the LSA providers, the LSA APIs, to go into the actual LSA service. This is the LSA ASS process. By the way, if you want to have some fun, you can try and kill it on a Windows environment, and you get a crash. Because Windows, as someone told me, it's like you kill ASS. Windows sees there is no one there to guard the stuff anymore, and he just kills himself.
I think the Blaster was killing LSS back in the day.
Yeah, that's good fun with LSS. I don't remember that one, but
Yeah.
Was it the Blaster Worm?
yeah.
I'm old.
Because again, if it's dead, then no security whatsoever. Okay, so So again, WinLogon speaks with the LSASS, and eventually it sends a query or the authentication request to the domain controllers, the KDC, and all of that Microsoft stuff. And obviously, if the session is successfully authenticated, it goes back and actually creates the Logon token, what's called a LUID or any other name, and then authentication phase is finished. Okay, so this is what's happening in the background. Now we are more interested in timestamps, right? When it actually happened. Okay, so again, event log, very simple. Now this event does not require any special turning on switches. By default, whenever someone logs on and the authentication is successful, this event will be created. Okay, event 4624. This will happen once for every interactive logon. Now the important thing to see here is obviously the username. Okay, this username, this is the endpoint name, and the logon type is important because we only want to look for logon types 2, 10, or 11.
Going to make a decision.
Sorry?
Decision. You didn't make a decision. Windows 7 or Mac.
Yeah, it's a Windows running on Mac, so it's kind of it has issues. So logon type 2 is actually a local logon. This is my Windows local logon, and 10 and 11 would be for remote authentications or remote access like RDP and ICA. Okay, so simply go to the event log, look for this event. Again, logon type 2, 10, or 11, and that's where authentication occurred. All right, so if you want to kind of measure how long it took to authenticate, there are better ways than what I'm showing here. Okay, we'll not get into that now because it's more complex, but essentially you can see when Logon UI was yeah, sorry.
Was that in Microsoft actually documents the login types, right?
Yeah, you have a great article with all the login types. Some are network, some are, but again, the only ones that we care about when we want to troubleshoot the login process is 2, 10, or 11.
So those are the interactive logons?
Yeah, interactive, local, and I think cached logon or something like that.
Yeah. Unlike another vendor that rarely documents anything.
Yeah, that's right. So by the way, if I promised no marketing, but as I mentioned before yesterday, this is where ControlUp and probably some other solutions start measuring the login duration. Okay, when this occurs, then these solutions will start the clock. Okay, because again, we don't really know, the session might be initialized. Think about a VDI endpoint. It's fully initialized. It's waiting on the login screen for a user. It can be there for an hour, but only when someone actually authenticates, that's where, from the end user experience, the login process starts. Okay, so for a few solutions, and ControlUp is one of them, this is where we start actually measuring login duration. Okay, so the authentication phase. Right, so what's happening after the authentication phase is, again, this is a mandatory phase. Again, with RDS, and obviously if you have UPM, then before this phase, the user UPM process have to load, sync the profile, and finish. Okay, or the network providers have to load. But if it's a plain vanilla Windows, the next thing that will happen after authentication is the user profile load phase. Okay, now this is obviously an important phase. In the past, we have seen lots of issues with this, and even now, if guys are using roaming profiles and redirection is not properly enabled, or guys are saving, a lot of files and app data or whatever, this can take a long time. Okay, now fortunately enough, it's very easy to figure out how long it took to load the profile from the Windows point of view. Super easy, nothing special to enable. Just go to the user profile service log. Do you guys know obviously you know the event log, right? So we have the application, security and system, everyone knows that. But do you know the applications log? You know that? Raise of hands, who knows the application log part?
It's not an application.
Yeah, let me show you that because this is important. So, very easy to go there, right? Just launch the event log, and as you can see here, we have the traditional logs, and we have the applications and services logs. Okay, this is the important part. This is where some of the logs I'm showing are located. So in this case, just go to Microsoft Windows, and the one I'm showing now, it's basically this guy here.
You won't find it on 2003 and XP.
No, it's only 7 and above, and fortunately most of our customers are on Windows 7 and above. Okay, so this is the log, and the log that we show next, by the way, is basically this guy here. Okay, so quite easy. And again, it's enabled by default. Right, so what do we want to look at here? So authentication has ended, and Windows will now try to load the profile. When Windows actually creates an event ID 1, which is really nice because it's 1, and with the timestamp. Okay, so this is actually the user profile service is telling Windows, I got notification from Logon to start loading the profile, and now reload the profile. So it doesn't matter if it's roaming, mandatory, or whatever, this event will always be logged on any Windows, starting again, Windows Vista. Okay, so you can go and see, okay, the profile was started to load at, in this case, 9:03 a.m. Okay? Now, luckily enough, you also have an end event for the same session, right? So the same log, only event ID 2. This is where it's finished. Okay, so very easy if you want to troubleshoot a user profile issue, just go here, look at event ID 1 and 2 for the same session ID, and that's it. You can see that in my case, it took less than, actually a second. Okay, it's a local logon, very small profile, no issues. Okay? Great, so user profile phase, pretty easy. Group policy, this is probably one of the most complex systems out there. Okay? And again, here I think I haven't found any Windows system where something is happening between the user profile and the group policy phase. Okay, so I would say 91%, the next thing that will happen after Windows finishing loading the user profile, the group policy engine will kick in. Okay, and that's a good thing because we like a nice sequential phases. Now, group policy obviously is very complex. A few things to notice about that. First, group policy processing will occur only once for a user account when he's logging into Windows. Okay, so just I had some issues there, but if you think about an RDS server, now you log on with your account, and then you create another session with the same user, group policy processing will not kick in because the processing already occurred for that user account. Okay, so it's not a session-based thing, it's a user-based thing. Okay, and that's why, by the way, you see in this event, the session ID is not mentioned, only the username. Okay, but again, for most environments, obviously VDI, but also RDS, we are always logging on with different users, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so how do we troubleshoot group policy? Let's say we want to find if the group policy phase is in charge of most of the delay during the logon process. So the easiest thing to do is actually go to the event log, go to the group policy log that I've just shown you guys, and you can actually go straight ahead and find event ID 8001, okay, with the relevant username. You obviously, from a timestamp perspective, okay, this is a manual process, but again, we'll show you guys a PowerShell script to make everything much easier. But let's say you do not have PowerShell available, I don't know why, but you don't. You can actually go to the Windows log, find out where the user profile finished loading, and then look at the time, notice the timestamp, write it in Notepad, go to the group policy log, and search for the first 8001 event for the same username. And Windows will tell you there in seconds how long it took him to process group policies before moving on. Okay, now, you will always see a 4001 event at the beginning of the group policy processing phase, and then 8001. Okay, now it sounds simple here, but actually in the event log, there would probably, especially in Windows 8 and 2012 R2, there are something like, there could be 100 events registered between these two events. Okay, so Windows is really, I think the group policy team, if Carl mentioned documentation, it looks like the group policy team are probably the best team in Microsoft in regards to APIs documentations and what's going on. They have an event for everything, okay? I'm now speaking with the domain controller, I'm enumerating the GPO objects, and everything with time, so it's really nice. If you want to drill down into group policy, everything is there in the event log. Which group policies are being processed, which extensions, how long it took them, okay? But eventually you just want to go to event ID 8001, and there you have the time. How long it took to process group policies. Right. So the next phase, group policy is finished, everyone is happy, and now user init is kicking in. Okay, so user init, this is a Microsoft process obviously, and as its name implies, this is the user initialization process. Okay, its main function is to load the shell. Okay, but obviously if we have Citrix, it's becoming a bit more complicated. But again, the user init phase, let's start with the simple option. Okay, so again, the user init should kick in right after group policy finished. That would be the case in almost any environment. And if you want to kind of measure this phase, how long it took for user init to complete its business, then the easiest thing to do is, as I mentioned in the beginning, go ahead and enable process auditing. Okay, without enable process auditing, you will not be able to know just by out of the box how long it took for this phase to finish. Okay, so go ahead, enable process auditing in the event log, and then just go to the log and first look for this event. Okay, so when did user init was initialized for that session? And again, just as I said before, the time area you want to look at is probably right after group policy is finished. Okay, so again, note in Notepad, what's the timestamp of the latest GPO event, and then go to the security log and check when this event has been registered, user init. Okay, so that's where the user init phase starts. Okay, now when does it end? So again, if you are dealing with a desktop session, which would be the case for any regular Windows, for physical Windows, for VDI, okay, and even for RDS desktops, then this phase finishes when Explorer EXE starts. Okay, so actually the time between this, in this case, it's immediate, but that would be the time that Windows took to finish the user init process. Okay, now in Citrix published app environments, it's a bit different. Okay, so what's happening with the published app environment is user init actually calls all the registry key processing, all the process mentioned in the app setup key. Okay, you guys know the app setup key in WinLogon? Raise of hands. Anyone know app setup? Okay. Dennis, yeah, for sure. Dennis actually wrote some of the code. No, not yet. Okay, so user init in a published app environment is executing cmstart, which is a Citrix process. cmstart is calling WF shell, which is the Citrix shell for the published app environments. And WF shell is actually launching a small process called ICAST. Okay, so this is again for Zen app environments, Zen app 6.5 and Zen app 7x. So all the Zen app flavors, even the old ones, starting from Zen app 5, you will see user init. The next thing you'll see in the log usually is cmstart, and then WF shell, and then ICAST. Okay, so ICAST, this is a helper process, which eventually starts the published app instance. Okay, so the easiest way to find how long it took user init to load in a published app environment is to probably switch this event here with ICAST, but you want to look on the termination event. Okay, so not 4688, but 4689. Okay, so again, for published desktop, this is easy, user init to Explorer. For published app, you want to go from user init to the ICAST exe termination event. Because, and this is very nice for anyone who wants to troubleshoot Zen app issues, ICAST exe is ending when the published app is launching. So it's a great way to figure out what's going on without even knowing the published app is executable. Okay, makes sense? Any questions on this phase? It's a bit easy? Good? Anything? Okay, so the last phase is obviously to initialize the shell. Okay, this is pretty obvious. Now, again, we have two options. We have published apps and published desktops. Okay, so for desktop sessions, obviously the beginning of this phase would be when the Explorer EXE shell is being launched. Again, this is from the security log. And this phase will end when the desktop shell is actually ready for the end user. Okay, now, unfortunately, there is no easy way in Windows to tell when the Explorer shell is actually ready. Okay, that's a bit of an issue. There are some advanced or really advanced tools you can use to figure out when the shell is actually ready. But I would say for most of us, well, there are one tip I can give you if you actually you suspect that the shell phase is what's delaying the Logon process. You can check, again, in the event log, when did the first process after Explorer EXE was launched. Okay, one of the auto-runs processes, any apps you have in the system tray or whatever, this would be a good indication when the shell is actually ready for interaction. Okay, so it's a bit tricky. Yeah, if anyone knows here an easy way to tell when the shell is initialized, then by all means you're welcome to comment.
Join control.
I didn't want to say it, but
I would say when REST Workspace Manager says it is so, but
yeah.
With an expensive way, but yeah.
Yeah, but then you have to use the rest.
Biased at all.
It's complicated. Okay, so these were the major phases of the Windows Logon process. Again, agnostic, Windows, no Citrix, nothing, just the main 6 phases and an easy way to figure out what's the overall length of each phase. Okay, obviously we'll have the deck in your email in like 6 months when Alice finished. So, maybe try to show. If you really want, you can send me an email or I'll send you the deck right away. Okay, it's the internet, right? You can do things.
Oh no, the PowerPoints will be on share file straight away, like they
Great.
normally are. It's just the video.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, now
What's the share file say?
Let's move on to how are we on time, Alex? We have time. We're good.
I don't know.
Okay,
Keep going.
you're in time. We're good. Okay, great. So the geek stuff. Okay, so this was pretty easy. Event log. I think besides event log, you didn't need anything else to see what I was showing you up until now. There are some more advanced things in Windows which you can use to deep down even further. Okay, now I want to show you one thing I really like, which is not too well known, but I think it's probably the best way to troubleshoot almost anything in Windows. Okay, and that's obviously the event tracing for Windows. How many of you guys in the room knows about event tracing for Windows? Okay, so that's great. So imagine if in this room like 50%, and probably in the user communities, and it's like
100%.
yeah, like one guy out. Yeah. Okay. So and the reason it's not that popular is because it's a bit complex, and Microsoft hasn't done a really good job publishing it. But once you become a friend with ETW, it's really a great tool to figure out what's going on. Okay. So I'm going to show you an example of how to use ETW logging to troubleshoot one of the aspects of the Logon process. Okay. Now essentially ETW is a high-speed kernel tracing utility. It was designed to log events, really high volumes of events for any Windows mechanism. Okay, and actually companies can write providers. Citrix actually has some pretty cool ETW providers. In case you didn't know, the CDF tracing mechanism is actually built on top of ETW. Okay, so this is a really good mechanism to learn, and if you're a sysadmin, I think this is great. Okay, so how do we actually use ETW to troubleshoot something in the Logon process? So I'm going back to the examples where we have to find out processes, start and stop events. Okay, so you've seen one example where we can go ahead and enable process auditing. Okay, now some companies might not want to do that. They might be afraid it might be causing issues, and also, to be friendly, the event logs and the security log doesn't give you all the info. For example, there is no easy way from the event log that contains the process start and termination event to figure out what's the session ID, okay, or which user is running that. It's all cryptic there, the session ID is not exposed, so there are disadvantages of figuring out process start and end events from the event log. Now ETW gives you much better data, and I'll show it to you in a second. So I'm going to walk you through very simple steps of how to enable this and how to actually look on the ETW data and figure out process start and end events. Okay, so these are the steps. Let's just start. Okay, so it's very easy to start a new event log trace, ETW trace, sorry. Just open Perfmon, right? Everyone knows Performance Monitor. Go to the data collector sets, event trace sessions. It's interesting to notice that a bunch of them are already running by default. So that's, Microsoft is doing that. Out of the box, like a few, like something like 10 of them are enabled. And they're actually feeding some of the event logs you're seeing and some of the other interfaces Windows. So you can simply right-click, create a new data collector set, select the option to enable a new ETW trace, and then you have to add a provider. Okay? So the provider list is quite extensive, and it's not that well documented. But for the purposes of our session, there is only one provider you have to load, and that's the kernel process provider. Okay? It's an excellent provider that will basically log any process event to the ETW log. Okay, so very easy, you just load a single provider and click on OK. Now by default, ETW will log this data to a file. Okay, we log it to an ETL file. Okay, so we actually create a new data collector set, choose the provider, click on Next. You can say where the file will be located, and you click on OK, and then you start the log like you do here, like any other Perfmon counter, right? Just choose the newly created provider and click on Start. Now go ahead and obviously reproduce the issue. Log on, wait for someone to log on. And once the logon process is finished, just go back in here and stop the trace. Okay, stop the trace, and only when you stop the trace, the ETL file will be created. Okay, in the folder you have specified. So now you have an ETL file. An ETL file is obviously a binary file, so it's not that easy to read unless you're Dennis. So we want to go ahead and kind of, convert this to something more humanly readable. Okay, so there are a few options. Windows, again, this is all without any third parties, just plain Windows stuff. Windows has a built-in utility called Trace RPT, which actually takes an ETL file and converts it to a human readable file, like either EVTX, you can actually turn this into an event log file, or to an XML file, which, again, each one can choose what he prefers, but in this case, I'm basically converting the ETL file that captured one Logon process and turning it into an XML file. Okay, so that's the command, that's it, very simple. And then, what I did in this case, I simply opened the XML log file with Notepad++. Okay? Now again, remember we're looking for process start and end events, and everything we listed here. By the way, ETW is great, it does not consume any resources whatsoever. Okay, it's very low-level kernel stuff, so you can enable this on a fully loaded RDS server and no one will take any hits. Okay? So this is an example of a process start event. Okay, now look at the data, it's much better than the event log. We have the process ID, okay, we have the parent process ID, we have the session ID, we have the username, we have the path location, we have everything we want right here. Okay, so this is a great way to, if you're coming to a new customer and you want to troubleshoot Logon issues, go ahead, enable for a day, enable this ETW provider. You can also enable the group policy provider and user profiles. You will have everything in the same log. Okay, the thing is the log might get big really fast, so you want to leave it for maybe a few logons in the morning, then shut it down and just open the log file. Okay, this will help you figure out what's going on. We don't have much time left, so real quick, the PowerShell scripts. Okay, so as part of our job, obviously in ControlUp, we want to extend our library. And what we'll do, and this will be available actually on web pages with the full PowerShell code, we have wrote 2 PowerShell scripts that you can use outside of ControlUp on any Windows endpoint. Okay, just log on to the Windows endpoint, run the PowerShell script. In the arguments area, feed in the username, and I think the domain name in this case, and just hit on enter. The PowerShell script will run, it will query all the logs I've shown you. Obviously, you have to enable process auditing. Okay, this is part of the prerequisites for some of the phases here. But once you do that, we will show you in a very easy table what's going on. Okay, so this is much easier than going to all the event logs and doing it manually. So this PowerShell will be hopefully will be available next week. Okay, on our website, you can send me an email or send you the actual PowerShell code. And it will also be on our website. So it will show you the overall login duration time. We calculate this from the login time, event ID 4624, all the way to the shell end phase. Okay, and we break down everything we know. And I just we have 2 minutes.
No, I'm just asking. Do you have like a pack of PowerShell, which you want to share with the community?
Yeah, we have again. It's in our website. There is a section called scripts, and all the PowerShell scripts are listed there with the code and everything, so you can just download them. Okay?
Google ControlUp scripts.
Yeah, ControlUp scripts. That's it. Okay, so this will be available next week. The other one I'll show you is available even today. The cool thing here, if you think again about ControlUp, we have the login duration other column, the infamous other phases. And so in here, we're actually trying to break down some of the things that we do not currently do directly in the product. And you can see some examples here. So this is new, right? How long it took for the network provider phase to load. Citrix UPM, very popular on almost any Citrix environment. How long it took for that phase to finish. GP scripts, again, only if they're running synchronously. And pre-shell, which is actually user init. Okay, I tried to come up with a friendly name for user init, and I ended up with pre-shell. If anyone has any better ideas, then please share them with me. Okay, so this will be available next week. This guy is already available on the website. Okay, just launch this PowerShell command to actually break down the group policy phase to extensions. Okay, so we can see if it took, for example, 10 seconds, a list of all the group policy extensions that were loaded, and how long it took for each extension to execute. Okay, this is out there, this is ready. And I think we're probably out of time, so I have some links here. This is a link to the PowerShell script for the GPO. The Analyze Login Duration script, TBS is, what I meant by TBS? To be scripted? No, to be shared, sorry. So to be shared, okay? This will be shared hopefully next week. And yeah, I think that's it. That's it, guys. Questions?
Just
before
for the video, for those watching, I just want, because you did mention it yesterday, or not to the extent, that you have the community program for the
Yeah.
control app as well. You can say a couple
Yeah,
words
sure.
about
So this is, for example, this web page will take you to the control app scripts area, which is basically the script-based actions repository. And you will see all the actions available via control app can also be enumerated to the actual scripts. So even if you are not a control app user, and you will be at some point, right? Obviously, you can actually download the VB or PowerShell code and use it as a regular customer. Okay, so this is available. This is right there, and the Analyze Login Duration script, which is actually one of the guys working in my team, Liron. He's a great guy. He's a Citrix expert. He's writing this PowerShell script. It's almost ready, right? The one with all the phases. So hopefully next week we'll share the link. And if for some reason you're not getting it, just send me an email and we'll be happy to share it with you guys. Yeah. Just Carl and then you would, yeah. So.
Have you done, just curious, have you done a comparison between the old way of mapping drives or login scripts versus GPPs and the timing difference between them?
Yeah, well, I haven't done an official bake-off or something like that, but from what I've seen, for example, the GPP extension that creates drive maps is not that great from a timing perspective. So, for example, if the drive map is not available, it will wait 3 seconds until it timeouts and move on to the next drive map. Wherein, for example, in a batch command, which is very low level, with just drive map or something, it will take much faster. Okay, so that might be a good reason to do it either to steal that specific thing, do via a batch command, or use, again, absence or S or whatever. But for simple environments with like a single drive map or something, then you can go ahead and use GPP. Right? But obviously the lower you get in the system, you get closer to the APIs, it will run faster.
I'm just going to point out a lot of those performance tools are in the Windows deployment or assessment and deployment kit. So if you want one place to look at deploying Windows and actually analyzing performance, just download that.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. By the way, the Expert obviously is the main tool out there. Now it says a new name. I don't have any idea what it's called. But the thing is that these tools are pretty complex. Okay, you need to spend quite a lot of time to kind of learn the UI and figure out what's going on. And in the end, the set of data you want to see is quite limited. So that's why we're doing the PowerShell scripts, and eventually Expert, by the way, is built mostly on ETW. Right, so if you know what's happening in the background, you can just go ahead and use the actual ETW providers instead of Expert. Okay, thanks you guys.